Please join me in welcoming the author of First Contact, the story of our obsession with aliens, Becky Ferreira.
Thank you.
So thanks for being here. It's really great to have, this book is really wonderful, and it's a great sort of historical context and a sort of guidebook to different ways of looking at the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So I feel like it's a really nice sort of coda to a movie like this. And in that respect, I thought maybe we could start off by talking a bit about Contact itself. You spent so much time studying aliens and what people think about the idea of aliens and how long they've been doing that. So with all of that recently on your mind, what's it like to watch Contact in 2025?
Oh, that was just such a joy to watch, honestly. I love the book as well, and I think it's a beautiful movie. So I was really moved throughout, and it's been a couple years since have seen it, and I just think it's a really smart way of looking at it. It's really interesting. I had forgotten all of the kind of fun faith and sort of the animating force of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence especially is very faith animated, and actually scientists have been pretty open about that for a long time. So I love that they worked that in, and it's just it's a beautiful movie, and of course the very nice epithet at the end for Carl. He died only 6 months before this movie came out, so it must have been very challenging, I think, for everybody who loved him to not have him be able to see the movie in the end. But it is a beautiful fruition of his career.
Yeah, and it's quite a journey. So maybe we should situate this project in the kind of broader timeline. So as you understand it, how far back does the story of Contact go?
Oh, you mean like the story of just looking for aliens, or the story of the movie?
Yeah.
So him and his wife Andrewian, who developed the story with him and co-wrote the screenplay, they had been talking about it since the 70s, and they weren't getting traction on it. So that's why Carl Sagan wrote the book, which I believe came out in 1985. I think it's the 40th anniversary.
Yep.
So it was really a passion project for a long time, and it's was obviously really well critically received and commercially received. So it's like, it was almost 20 years in the making. So yeah,
so
amazing.
The story going back to the 70s, what was the sort of state of this kind of research when when he was sort of thinking about, what would it be like if we actually got a signal from some other place?
Yeah, I mean, he was so formative to the search for extraterrestrial life and intelligence. At that point, it was such a new thing. I mean, the first real search was done at the West Bank, the West Virginia telescope, and that was in 1961. So him talking about this is less than 20 years after that. And there's a very famous meeting that happened. It's Green Bank, I think, right? Yeah, at West Virginia. That happened in 1961, where Carl Sagan and Francis Drake and all of these luminaries in this field all got together, and they came up with the Drake equation and trying to constrain how we would actually do this. And at that point, most of the parts of the Drake equation, which estimates how many stars are in the galaxy, how many of those stars would have planets, so on and so on, until you get to what would be the odds of intelligent life forming and how long would they be around. That all those were not constrained at that point. Nobody really knew, and now we're very lucky to live in this time where a lot of those kind of variables are filled in. We know how many stars there are. We are, discovering exoplanets all the time, so you can put some constraints on that. But of course, the actual the thing that we're all interested in, whether there is life, whether there is intelligent life, and how long those civilizations would last, that's all completely unconstrained still.
So in terms of the research itself, can you break that down a little bit? I mean, what we see her doing here is literally just wearing headphones and then sometimes looking at some graphs on a computer screen. But what is the actual research like for people who do this work?
I'm not sure because I've never been in the lab with them, but I know that there's a lot of dramatization. They're not listening on headphones. I think that's just a fun thing for the movie, but it certainly it makes it really involving and engaging. But in terms of the radio spectrum, so that's been the oldest search. Radio astronomy, it goes back to the 1930s, and now you're getting a lot more of like the optical search for these types of intelligent life. But the thing is, it's really difficult to know what to expect. People are really just looking for anything that looks weird. You may recall a couple years ago the megastructures story. There was a star that was dimming in a very strange way. So there's a lot of natural explanations for that have come up, but that's the kind of thing where something that just doesn't look right. There's been a lot of searches for things like Dyson spheres, which is this idea that you'd have a big solar panel around a star, and you'd be able to see that that kind of in its spectrum of that star, you'd be able to see that kind of technological signature. So we have both radio and optical right now, but the estimate is that in terms of the night sky, searching for technosignatures, signs of intelligent life specifically, we've searched about a hot tub's worth of an ocean. That's the metaphor that they use. So it's strange that we don't see them in the way that we put out signals. Anyone who looked at us in 100 light years would be able to tell that we are a species that produces radio signals. And has pollution in our atmosphere and things like that. So there's anything that's looking at us would know that. So it's strange that we don't have it locally, but we really are just at the beginning of that search.
What was the sort of turning point in our civilization, as it were, where the idea of non-human beings started to become aliens, as we understand that?
Yeah, as I argue in the book, like it goes back. I believe that the divine beings that show up in our sky myths and things like that are a early iteration of this need we have to believe that we're not alone. So I think that the idea that we're not alone goes deep into prehistory, because every culture personifies the skies and every culture tells stories about what might be there. But it kind of changes into a scientific idea about 2,500 years ago, where this idea of cosmic pluralism emerges in ancient Greece and the Hellenistic world. And it really comes out of this idea that people start trying to explain the phenomenon in the skies in ways that don't invoke supernatural entities. And one person I highlight is this philosopher Anaxagoras, who's about 400 BC, and he is the first to really work out the mechanics of eclipses, and he realizes these are just places. They're casting shadows, and they're physical, real places, and that's sort of when the first inkling of what we would really consider aliens today to be, where hey, we're on this planet. There's other physical planets. There's no reason why those shouldn't be inhabited as well.
One of my favorite parts of this movie is when the character describes what she's looking for, tongue-in-cheek, as little green men. Where do we first see the kind of little green men trope in our culture coming to the fore?
Well, that is very much a part of early science fiction. But so you kind of get the gray alien trope pretty early in the 30s and 40s, and that really influences, I think, a lot of the alien abduction tales and things like that. But the little green men thing is actually kind of a funny thing, too, because it's the way that pulsars were first described. So when Jocelyn Bell was first looking at pulsars, which are these very rhythmic neutron stars that they look like an artificial signal because they're like clockwork. And eventually, of course, they come up with this natural explanation. But the first pulsar ever found, I believe it was called for a long time colloquially LGM-1 for Little Green Man 1, because they really did think they might have found an optical beacon when they found it. But alas, just a really cool star.
Well, the other thing is that's sort of radical about this movie is that there were a lot of sort of disaster movies made about aliens coming to Earth, and even around this time you had Independence Day and things like that. And that goes back to a really long time ago. I mean, H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, that sort of a thing. So where does this concept of aliens being a hostile thing, where did that first sort of take root, and how do you sort of explain it in the kind of longer history of this stuff?
Oh, yeah. Aliens are just taking over the narrative ruts that we already use for everything else, right? So we love a good story about something that's like a big monster. So that is just aliens taking on that form. I have like a list of archetypes that aliens fall into: the monsters, the saviors, they and the peers, right? Like the Star Trek kind of thing, the people we can communicate with, that we can have some kind of empathy for. But these kind of narrative ruts are very old. You think about things like myths, like Zeus coming down and abducting and impregnating people. I mean, this is like something that gets adopted into a lot of alien kind of content later on. So I think we just really like a certain type of narrative, and aliens are just conforming to that. And so I think it's interesting to think about like how really alien they probably will be, that they won't be conforming to those mythological archetypes. Maybe they will be, and we'll all get invaded by War of the World style tripods or whatever. But I think it really comes from our own, vast like repertoire of existing stories that they're just falling into.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of, conceptually what this movie does is so different from anything else we've really seen in science fiction, in the sense that, probably there were some people watching this and hoping they were going to see some sort of tentacled thing walking towards her on the beach, but instead you get her dad and this whole like kind of concept of, we just need to take baby steps with this. What do you make of that conceit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very Sagan-y movie because it's very much about like the nature of science and faith. So I think it's trying to fit into that. I do kind of love that he's like, oh, I thought this would be easier for me to just show up as your deceased loved one. It's just like, you don't really understand humans. That's not going to be that easy to be like, oh, but it's actually not my dad. But it's this. I don't know. It's a really cerebral look at it, and I think this idea that there's this community of different civilizations that are all traveling together and communing together, that actually is pretty old as well, and I think it has a little bit of Gene Roddenberry in that. It's just that we don't actually see that kind of get fully teased out in this movie. I think Carl Sagan really wanted to just explore the mystery a little bit more in that sense, but I think it's a really original idea, and it's super cool to watch, and I love that. I think it's really well rendered. That beach scene is beautiful, it was a joy to see that again.
And how about the wormhole concept itself? I mean, you hear a lot of talk go by quickly in terms of what they think actually happens there.
You mean like what's like the whole idea of like
how
galactic transit?
Yeah. How feasible does that seem based on what we know?
I don't think it seems that feasible based on what we know. Unfortunately, the speed of light seems to be very annoyingly persistent, and I mean they are theoretical, as she says. There's no reason that they can't exist according to general relativity. But from what I understand, and I'm not an expert in this at all, but that these are like very small entities, and the idea of like traversing them is not really something that I think people think is possible at this point. It would be really nice to be able to get around the speed of light. So far, no luck on that. No dice on that.
Well, the other thing that's kind of fascinating is that we're only seeing one facet of the search for extraterrestrial life from a hard science context here, not from the Star Trek context, but there's the radio waves, and then earlier in the weekend we watched this documentary about the James Webb Space Telescope, which is studying the atmospheres of planets and other solar systems. So there's that research going on, and then we also have probes on other planets like Mars, which seems to be looking at some interesting rocks recently that may or may not be remnants of early life. So where do you see the most progress being made with this kind of research?
Yeah, I have to say the biosignature search is what really I think is the most fascinating, because technosignatures, it would be great to get one, but I think it's luck, right? Like we don't know how to look for that. Whereas with biosignatures, we do, and we're now finding them. A lot of like potential biosignatures, I should say, a lot of really tantalizing things. As you mentioned, Perseverance recently found these evidence of redox reactions on Mars. They could have a geological origin. They could have a biological origin. In any case, these would probably be microbes that lived about 4 billion years ago, if they existed at all. Of course, nobody knows. So these would be from a time when Mars was wetter and warmer, and we know was habitable, but we don't know if it's inhabited. And then you also have other really exciting solar system missions like Europa Clipper and JUICE. They're both going to the Jupiter system. And then, you mentioned these amazing exoplanet discoveries. I think there's going to be a lot more of those. And I think we're going to have to it would be great if we have a slam dunk and it's like that's clearly a technosignature, like pollution in the skies or something like that. Or you see city lights or something like that. But I think it will be more likely to be this kind of cosmic mosaic where you might see atmospheric chemistry that's could have a geological origin, could have a biological origin, but it's a numbers game. Like you just keep looking at different atmospheres and different skies, and if you see the same signatures over and over again, then maybe you can do it as sort of an odds game. Maybe some of those are geological, maybe some are biological, but if you're getting the same signals all the time, you can kind of constrain the odds a little bit better. So I don't think it's going to be the movie set us up for this like smoking gun, smoking death ray or whatever it's going to be. But I think it will more likely be kind of tantalizing. And then you have to also think, like, what if you find a really clear biosignature? It's clearly life, and this world is like 500 light years away. And then it's just like, oh, I guess we'll never be able to see that in our lifetime. And it's just something that we're going to have to get used to, I think, is the scale of the universe is quite frustrating, as they alluded to in the movie.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of space. But the other thing is kind of funny thing about this movie is how it dates itself with all the Bill Clinton stuff, right? Which was apparently, from my understanding, he did a press conference about some bacteria that was found on a Martian rock, and they were using footage from that, right?
Yes. I don't know what most of the but that was definitely the press conference where it was, like, I believe, 1996. There was a Martian meteorite that is still very controversial to this day. It had these structures inside of it that were again, elusive, not clearly life, not clearly not life. But he went ahead and did this press conference and was like, oh, it could be that America found life or whatever. And so it's actually kind of like among astrobiologists today, like kind of a blunder because, and one of the reasons that protocols around these kinds of discoveries have emerged to try to make sure that there is like a clear consensus and a way to communicate it so that you're not just implying that you found Martian microbes on Earth, right? So, but that is a very tantalizing meteorite indeed, and still causes controversy to this day.
So, however we may end up finding something, if we find something, there will be a sort of a complicated process in terms of figuring out how to tell people about it.
Yeah, there are protocols that are in place now that try to make sure that there is a consensus scientifically, and but also try to rush the results as quickly as possible, because I think there's emerged like a very adversarial relationship between governments and institutions and science institutions and people who are really invested in this issue. So like there's a real balancing act of like trying to have good information but also not wanting to seem opaque. So those are constantly in development, and I think they're good guidelines, but ultimately this kind of discovery is gonna break any guardrails. I think it's good to have the guidelines. I think it's also good to be prepared for it to be I don't want to swear, but a total it show. If that ever does happen. So yeah.
Right. Well, in light of that, before we wrap, I wanted to share one observation that stood out to me from your book, because there's some really incredible writing throughout it and a lot of really poignant observations. But this one in your introduction really seemed pertinent to me. You said, "This great search will end someday, one way or another. We will either find life elsewhere, filling in that most irresistible data point of our universe, or we will have come to terms with our fate as a biological fluke in an apparently barren universe." So, setting those two possibilities out there, what do you think?
I think my prediction would be probably not in our lifetimes, but I would predict that there's microbial life at least, maybe even in our solar system. As for intelligent life, I just don't know. As Ellie said, I just don't know. But I think one of the books that's really influenced me is called Rare Earth, and their argument is that intelligent life complex life in general is basically probably not there. They make the case that maybe microbial life is common, but their takeaway is like, well, say that is the case, how much more pressure is that on us to take care of the amazing biosphere we have here, which is bursting with anywhere there can be life, there is life on this planet, and it's just endlessly fascinating and diverse, right? So I think that's the message, like that if even if we don't get, I mean, I would love so much to have that happen in my lifetime, but I think it's always got to be a reflection back on how lucky we are to be a life bearing planet, and not only life bearing but like really life exploding planet. So yeah.
To be continued, in other words. Well,
Exactly.
thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking around, folks. And Becky will be here to sign copies of the book in the lounge. So appreciate you being a part of this conversation tonight.
Thank you so much.